Welcome back to Service to School Stories. I'm your host, Sydney Mathis, Director of Student Success here at Service to School. As a former college admissions officer and the spouse of an active duty service member, I'm excited to dig into topics within the higher education landscape as it relates to veterans and transitioning service members. Let's dig in. All right, everyone. Today I am joined by two of my incredible colleagues at Princeton, one of our VetLink partner schools here at Service to School. I'm so excited to chat with them both about their work here in the veteran space, supporting students throughout the college admissions process, but also once they are on campus. We get a lot of really great feedback from our applicants about the work that you all are doing at Princeton. So thank you for your time, effort, and energy that you've invested into this incredibly deserving student population, and just the level of care that you provide to students who are pursuing higher education, but more specifically at Princeton. So first, Alex Bustin, he is our POC here at Service to School at Princeton. Alex is the Senior Associate Dean and Director of Transfer and Military Veteran Admission at Princeton, also joined by Dr. Keith Shaw. He's the Director of Transfer, Veteran, and Non-Traditional Student Programs at Princeton. I know you also work closely with some applicants through the Warrior Scholar Project program. So excited to hear a little bit about your work there as well. So I'm going to turn it over to both of you to introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about the work you're doing at Princeton before we dig into some of the other conversation questions that we have today.
Thanks, Sydney. Really great to be here, and thank you for inviting us on to speak about our work and also our great partnership with you all and Warrior Scholar, as you mentioned. So just background on myself, as you mentioned, I'm Senior Associate Dean in the Admission Office, so effectively the third most senior member of our office behind the Dean and Director, so managing the oversight of the office, but also particularly the programs you mentioned, the transfer and military and veteran admission, to the extent it falls within the transfer program, but also students of that background that may apply outside of it. I've been at Princeton in total of about 18 years total, including my undergraduate years, but most recently been working with Keith closely since the reinstatement of the transfer program in 2016, which was specifically to provide one pathway, not the exclusive pathway, but a pathway for more diverse students, including non-traditional students who have served or are serving in the U.S. military. So I work on the admission side, which is everything front-facing, which is really at any point when a student is considering applying to Princeton or higher education in general for what we call recruiting. So starting those conversations with students, all over the country and all over the world, but particularly focusing on students who are interested sometime down the line in applying to Princeton or in higher education. So I'll start those conversations and guide them with general questions they have or guidance to lead themselves up to the application process, whether it's academic work they need to put together, things they need to be doing or thinking about in advance. And then when they actually do apply, I oversee the process for the admission committee. So I chair the admission committee, I review their files, and work closely with our great colleagues in the financial aid office and also the dean of the college's office, which is also the purview under which Keith Shaw serves, to manage the transfer credit for those students as well. I'll also oversee like I said, admission for military populations outside of the transfer program. So we do have students who apply outside of it as first-year students, for example. Students will generally choose one of those two programs, and the question as to which one is another conversation I'll usually have with them up front when they're thinking about applying. And then after that, when students are getting admitted and getting ready to enroll, that's where the strongest overlap is between Dr. Shaw and I, and that's where they kind of really start to be handed over to his process as we consider bringing them to campus and enrolling them. My role after that is less formal from that point forward, so I still can maintain contact with the students after they enroll and so forth, and they'll definitely assist me in speaking to future students who are planning to apply, students who have, so to speak, been in their position, in their boots and so forth as they're planning to apply, because they're a great resource to provide their perspectives. But at that point, Dr. Shaw really takes over and sees them through the remainder of their experience at Princeton.
Yeah, I'm so much you mentioned that I'm excited to kind of dig into afterwards. But Dr. Shaw, can you tell us a little bit about your background as well?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Sydney. And let me echo Alex's thanks for creating a space for us to speak with you today. So I'm Dr. Keith Shaw. I work in the Emma Bloomberg Center for Access and Opportunity. And I wanted to start there because I think that's an important frame for the work that both Alex and I do. So the Emma Bloomberg Center opened last year because of a generous gift from Bloomberg Philanthropies but it also largely collected in one space a number of programs and initiatives that exist at Princeton, including both of our transfer and our veteran programs. And I think that signals something about the way that Princeton thinks about the work that it does with veterans, that we view our work, we view our transfer program, we view trying to create a space for veterans on campus as an access and opportunity initiative. And that covers everything that we do when working with the students. So as Alex said, we work very closely together, but in some respects, there's a very clear division of labor between his work and not my work, in that Alex finds the students and brings them here, and then I help support them once they arrive. And working with our student veterans has been a real honor and a real delight, and they've been great for Princeton. And I think it's important to lead with that as well, that from our point of view, veterans bring so much to campus with respect to the perspective they have, the experience they have, the maturity they bring, what they can provide both in and outside the classroom, that we really see this as a kind of reciprocal arrangement between the opportunities we hope to produce for the veterans, but then also the opportunities that the veterans bring to Princeton to make the undergraduate body more reflective of the wider society, and to be able to bring ideas, experiences, and perspectives to campus that otherwise we'd be sorely lacking. And so that's been really one of the best parts about working with this program. A lot of my job over the last 5 years, which is the length of time that the transfer program has been in existence, has been figuring out policies, procedures, and advising structures that support our students both in and outside of the classroom to make sure that they can thrive here. And one of, perhaps in retrospect, it should not have been a surprise, but one of the surprises that I had when working with this population particularly early was actually how little there was to be done on the academic side in some respects. And by that, what I mean was, I imagined when I took this job in 2017, that a lot of what I would be doing was trying to figure out, well, how do you support these students in the classroom when they're making the transition, sometimes from a community college space up to the rigor of the Ivy League, or sometimes when working with students who have had very long gaps in their educational history due to their military service. And while we have in fact done a lot in that register, one of the things that I discovered is these students are really ready to go. And so from the point of view of what do the support mechanisms need to look like, very often they look like the same support mechanisms we provide for every other student. And again, in retrospect, perhaps that should be no surprise, but what ended up being the bulk of the work that I did particularly early was acknowledging the ways in which veterans are non-traditional students. And so at Princeton, the overwhelming majority of our students are more traditionally aged. They tend to be between 18 and 23. They tend to be single. They tend to not have children. They have not had a career prior to coming to Princeton because they've come straight from high school. And obviously that's not true for many, if not most, veterans. And so what we've been trying to do on campus, and I think we've had a lot of success, but we will be the first people to also say that it is a work in progress, is figure out a way to make Princeton both more veteran friendly, but also more family friendly, to acknowledge that when a student veteran is coming on campus, that it's entirely reasonable for them to expect that their student identity, their Princetonian identity, is actually secondary to some of the other things that they prioritize, right? So for many of our students, before they're a student, they're a spouse or they're a parent. And to be able to thrive at Princeton, we need to be able to make space for that, to be able to provide support for that, to be able to provide housing accommodations and dining accommodations that work for that, to give them the flexibility both within the curriculum and in the way that they interact with their student life that makes it possible for them to prioritize their identities in the way that they want to. So that has turned into a large portion of the job. And as we move through this conversation, I'm happy to touch on any further there that interests you.
Yeah, so much there that interests me. But first and foremost, I just want to appreciate that, it's one thing to be military friendly in this space, but it's another thing to be military inclusive, and understanding that, kind of like you pointed out, Keith, the military community or your veteran students do have unique backgrounds, and coming with either family members or a service animal, and what does that look like for them on your campus? And the fact that you're being intentional about understanding, what a student veteran identity might look like for each individual student veteran, right? Because I think it's one thing to have, I identify, my pronoun she, her, you can look at me and see that I am a person of color. But for a lot of our student veterans, just by looking at them, don't necessarily understand that that could be a very important part of their identity. And by having resources and, support mechanisms in place for them to feel supported and welcomed and encouraged on campus, I think it's just so important for, our peers and our colleagues to be intentional in setting those support places, for student veterans to defer to when they are on campus. But it starts at the beginning, right? It starts with Alex. It starts in the admissions process. It starts with an intentional recruitment. And, we all want to say, I think the recruitment piece kind of makes you feel like it's like sales or business. But when you strip all of that away and you look at the humanistic part of this process and just wanting to understand who the applicants are, where they're coming from. And the reason we're having this conversation today is because, Alex, you do that so well. Right before this, we were having a conversation that you prefer to send your prospective applicants a Zoom link because it meets them where they're at. For sometimes they're overseas or in very different time zones. And the intentionality there is for you to understand where they're coming from and, build a better lasting relationship with them. So can we talk about that a little bit, in your work over the last, decade plus? Has recruiting and working with student veterans kind of been the population that you've always worked with? How did you find yourself working with this student population? And what do you think over the years has changed in your work here?
Sure, there are a few things to touch on there. I mean, the impetus obviously I think was with the reinstatement of the transfer program, and historically, Princeton, we won't go into the background of that, but Princeton kind of had a pause on that, which really kind of eliminated a pathway for any non-traditional student, particularly military, who had college credit either before or during the service and so forth. So they might consider to apply as a first-year student, but there weren't very many. And I think building that program and then establishing relationships like with Service to School and Warrior Scholar that help to provide a pipeline and encourage students even before we can get to them that they should be looking in our direction is obviously a huge part of that process. For me personally, it's very easy to be invested in this particular population. I'm not military myself, but I'm a very proud sibling of an Army infantry veteran, and so I have some experience, seeing that through my sister's eyes. But also, the path being obviously very different for different students. And I think whether it's the civilian side or even the military side, I think how diverse the military population is sometimes is overlooked. Diversity in terms of needs and so forth, things that Keith touched upon, but also in terms of academic preparation and academic trajectory. And what I really try to establish is that regardless of how meandering a path may have been, how strong or weak past academic records have been, encouraging students to especially as Keith was saying, based on what we've seen of their level of preparation, that they can absolutely be competitive applicants, regardless of whether high school went well for them or if they were ready to apply at high school or not. Chances are they may not have been, which is why may have been a reason why they joined the military or otherwise, or the first attempt at college didn't go as well necessarily. But those students can absolutely be as prepared if they manage a more recent academic trajectory. And really what I try to do is help them find out where they are, what their what their level of academic preparation has been, and what they need to do if they haven't already been doing it between where they are at that time and what they want to do at Princeton, that, whether that's in engineering or STEM, which obviously involves a more scaffolded set of courses in math and science and so forth, or maybe it's in humanities or writing. Even as a liberal arts institution, though, obviously even our engineers need to be able to write as well. So I think really the most important thing I try to stress is just how individualized this process needs to be, and how, like I said, I do enjoy doing that because I enjoy working with this population, and really started to do so in earnest when we stepped up our recruitment and really created this program to focus on those kinds of students. And the processes we have are primarily mirror the processes we have for the majority of our students, whether it's first-year students or transfer students. There are many institutions, including several great VetLink schools, that have a third option primarily for veterans. And part of the reason we don't do that is because of the way we integrate our students into the overall undergraduate student population, in terms of their academic needs and to the extent they're interested in the non-academic community focus as well. But that was also why I felt it was very important to intentionally have in my role not just a portfolio that involves recruiting these students, but really a title that indicates there is a director of transfer and military and veteran admission here, someone whose specific job is to work in admission of those students, and admission being the wider definition, not just reading the applications and admitting them, but also folding in the connection point, the recruiting and talking to those students as well. So the way I try to do it is a very upfront and individualized process, which again is facilitated by Service to School, because I think that is the expectation of Service to School or a Warrior Scholar partnership, that these are individuals with a wide array of needs. And I think it falls into a lot of the increase in access work we were doing even before the 5-10 years or so we've been recruiting veterans, for which the Emma Bloomberg Center on the administrative side and our recruiting efforts on the admission side have been applied. I mean, even among the traditional high school age population, there are a huge number of students that we work to recruit that are in the minority compared to average Princeton students, those who are in the first generation and their college and their family to go to college, the students of color, lower income students. These are all minority populations who face different barriers for different reasons because of one or any intersection of those particular identities or backgrounds. The military, having military experience or any other non-traditional experience, adds another layer to that in terms of a process that's already complex enough for the average traditional high school student, let alone someone who's trying to figure out a different type of trajectory. And then on top of that, because of the diversity of our servicemen and women, they may also have any intersection of those other identities, like I said, or backgrounds, first generation, low income students of color and so forth. So that's partly why I feel like it's important to have these individual conversations to meet those students where they're at. And I think there are many great resources they have, again, that you all provide through ambassadors and so forth from students who have done it themselves from the military, but also at the same time understanding that their trajectory, what they need to do to get from A to B to C in terms of their academic preparation may look very different from the student they're trying to advise or student that I'm trying to advise. So I really try to hammer down how just individualized this needs to be. And I think that also represents, again, the process and the philosophy Princeton has to all of its students. So why not, obviously, for a military population that needs that kind of guidance, to let them know that this is an open place, this is a welcoming place. I think one of the most common things I get, in addition to questions about academic preparation, is just some kind of maybe trepidation from some students about speaking to someone in a position at Princeton and what that means. And honestly, I like to think I can present a friendly face, or I'm not that intimidating. I think my mom would laugh if you told her people thought I was intimidating. So, and I think a Zoom conversation or a phone call at the very least helps to open that conversation and have a dialogue with those students. Zoom is as close as we can get virtually to students across the country and across the world to connect and have kind of a more informal conversation. And I tell the students, this is not an interview. I'm not evaluating you. I'm just trying to get a sense of where you are, where you want to go. And if that's Princeton, great. Here's what the things you need to consider, how to get there. Or if it's another conversation that you want to have with another VetLink school or another institution, I'm always happy to refer them to individuals, my counterparts at other colleges, or if they haven't been introduced to a Warrior Scholar or Service to School entity, to connect them with that as well. But again, I try to keep it very informal, and I tell them, you can curse at me or whatever. It's totally fine. I'm not looking for any kind of decorum or whatever in this sort of conversation, but really trying to represent what we do for our students, but also meeting these students through, again, at least one, if not many kind of barriers that they might face in a process that effectively was designed for the more type of traditional students, and that they may not think they are or either is attainable for them, or not to know how to navigate the kind of flexibility we can provide in our processes, whether it's the academic preparation or whether it is what to do for their teacher recommendations, their academic recommendations. Do they write about their service? Do they write about it, whatever? So I think helping them understand that we see the diversity of what their experiences are academically and also in the military, and that all those students bring value in terms of their perspectives. And more often than not, regardless of what their past academic history looks like, they can be, by virtue of their life experiences or academic experiences, much more prepared, I think, than they think for the type of experience at Princeton, whether it's academically or otherwise. So that's why I feel the importance of kind of making time to have these conversations. They don't have the time to do it for all students, obviously. But this is obviously a population that we prioritize based on my purview, but also because, like I said, because of all the different angles and intersectionality that our students may face. It doesn't apply for every student. Some of them are very prepared, largely because maybe they've already been working with service to school or other ambassadors. So there's very little advising you have to give to some students in that position. But there's a good number of them that just aren't aware or not sure what they need to do. So to be able to provide some kind of guidance and assistance myself, or connecting them with others, sometimes it involves our students, kind of they talking about their positions and how they got to Princeton from where they are. That's an incredibly valuable thing that they can provide. But whatever part I can play in it, whether it's the handoff after service to school or connecting them with others, is I feel it's very important. And regardless of whether it works out at Princeton or wherever their next higher education journey might be, you're happy to play a small role in helping to point them in that direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the points that you mentioned, that, supporting this population is more about just understanding where they're at. And it's such an individualized process. But something that I've talked to a lot of my coworkers about at Service to School is I haven't served. We're an active duty Army family, but my experience with this student population started in admissions. And my fiance, who is now my spouse at the time, that was kind of the office's connection to the military. So they're like, here's Sydney, you can work with this student population, ask your fiance if you have any questions about, their background or what their jobs were. And it was kind of, an opportunity for me to take a leap. But I feel like a lot of our colleagues in the admissions space, they're either nervous because they don't identify as a veteran or they don't understand the military community. And not necessarily being a veteran yourself, the time and the energy that you've invested in better understanding their needs and what this process could look like for them, that's what it takes, right? You don't have to have served to serve this community. And I think if some of our admissions colleagues would just invest that time and either partnering with Service to School or just talking to some of their applicants who come from a military background, they would start to understand that, like you mentioned, they're not entirely different as far as their student profile, but the support might look a little bit different in the process, right? They're, for the most part, still transfer students. Sure, some of their credits might come from DLI or might come from, other schools that you might not traditionally see applicants coming from, but their needs as far as an applicant, some of their questions are oftentimes the same. But the support that they might, the advice that you might provide to them, or, the handoff there to Keith might look a little bit different. But at the end of the day, they're not too much different as far as an applicant from your adult student population, right? Which, Keith, leads me into kind of some questions for you in working with them as far as to support once they arrive on campus. Because, we mentioned that you work with all non-traditional students. So can you talk to us a little bit about the support that you put in place, or that you see our student veterans benefit from the most once they arrive on campus there?
Yeah, for sure. If you don't mind, I want to go back real quickly to something you were just talking about, though, which was the suggestion of a sense of almost incomprehensibility in two directions, right? The possibility that someone that doesn't have a whole lot of experience working with veterans, but works at a college in some capacity, whether it's admissions or as faculty or as support of some kind, a kind of almost imposter syndrome when it comes to, will I be able to successfully work with a military affiliated population? But then you're also pointing to, and Alex spoke to, the sort of inverse, where sometimes a prospective student veteran might feel intimidated or confused talking to us, and we're trying to find a way to make them comfortable to recognize, no, we're just people and we just work at a school and it's going to be fine and we can just have a conversation. And I do feel like we would get a lot further in both directions if everyone would just take a deep breath and calm down and recognize we're just interacting with other people. And right, if we just kind of treat everyone like an individual that, yes, are going to have a particular set of needs and challenges, and some of them might be more frequently born by this particular conversation, but it really doesn't take a whole lot more specialized training than empathy and willingness to learn from experience. I just feel like that's kind of the bedrock from which really successful collaborations can emerge.
Yes.
But you had asked about some of the support that we provide to our student veterans. And so, as Alex was suggesting, the overwhelming majority, though not all, of our student veterans are transferred students. And so a lot of the support that we provide to veterans also extends to other transfers. And one of the fun parts about my job is working not only in the overlap in the Venn diagram between those two populations, but actually the outliers, right? So the veterans who aren't transfers and the transfers who aren't veterans. And so that means that sometimes we're throwing into the mix the 40-something Marine Special Forces with the wife and 2 children. And then it also means that that person is working with the 19-year-old community college student from Miami that has no military affiliation whatsoever. And the way that they learn from each other when they're put into the mix is part of what makes the work really exciting. But in any event, as I suggested, academically, it's not that the students don't need support. It's more that the kind of support that they need isn't necessarily in need of really radical customization, right? And so one of the things that we do is, if you're a student veteran admitted to Princeton, we automatically invite you to our free summer bridge program. And that's an opportunity where a student can take a 4-credit class, go through a co-curricular program that acclimates them to what student life is going to be like at Princeton, gets them early access to advising and other resources. And from the point of view of student veterans, not that the academic experience isn't useful, I think it is, but actually the more important piece is the co-curricular one, because it's either teaching or reminding them what it looks like to be a successful student again. And from our point of view, that's very important to be able to do that work in June and July rather than September and October, because the curriculum does move fast. And we don't want students to feel like they arrive and instantly hit a wall, but feel like they have a more reasonable runway to be able to rebuild those muscles that have possibly atrophied from time away from school, and put them in touch with real experts that can help them develop student success practices. So once the semester starts for real, they've both banked a class and know the whole campus, right? That when the more traditional freshmen arrive months later, they can show them around, right? And they know where the health office is and the library is and the residential college advisors are and all of that. And so there's a kind of learning the navigation early that really pays off in terms of just the students' basic comfort level in being able to attack the semester. The other thing that we do is I or one of my colleagues teach them all in a specialized seminar that meets the university writing requirement. And this might sound in some ways like an odd thing to do, but it's actually one of the places where the community forms, right? And so it's no surprise, given this population, that this is a group of students that really looks out for one another. They have their own student organization that I'm the staff contact for, called Princeton Student Veterans Organization. And being able to learn together what the basic elements of successful academic argument look like at a school that prioritizes research and has a required senior thesis is both a really important stepping stone, but also an opportunity for them to recognize that whatever their educational background is, they have something to contribute to that process, but they also have something to learn from their colleagues, right? And I think that being able to intentionally create not just a social community, that was going to happen anyway as a function of their shared background, but a real intellectual community such that the students are supporting one another as they move through the curriculum. Many of them are going into the same majors, many of them are going into the same labs, to have people that they already know where they can decide, okay, we need to take this politics stats class and none of us wants to do it, but we have to do it. So all 3 of us will take it at the same time. Those are friendships and collegiate relationships that sustain throughout the entire time that they're here, right? And so some of my job is academic support, and I take that really seriously, but a lot of it is community formation. And, again, given who the students are, they don't really need much of a nudge to do some of that work on their own. But being able to attach it to their academic ambitions, I think, is a really important thing to do. And what we've learned, which is probably not going to be much of a surprise to your audience, is that they develop a really strong pay it forward mentality.
Yep.
Right, where we have our incoming transfer class, they're arriving on the 22nd, and they've had the students who are current juniors and seniors have been reaching out to them since the moment that they were admitted, right? And so the students that are going on into mechanical engineering are going to meet up with our juniors and seniors that are in that department. Same with politics. Students that are going into the humanities are already talking about what it looks like to do Princeton's humanities sequence successfully. And so one of the things that I've really appreciated about this job is how, to some extent, it's been my job to set up the forum in which some of this work takes place. But at a certain point, I can kind of just sit back and just watch it work, because the students are going to believe the upperclassmen, who are also veterans, more than they're going to believe me anyway. And the fact that they're excited to do that work makes it really fulfilling.
Absolutely.
The other piece that I think has been really important for us is the work that we've done with housing and dining, and the policies that we've put into place around campus life that allow our veteran students to navigate the student space a little bit differently from more traditional students. And I should say that the students themselves have been really effective organizers and advocates to make my job easier, pushing substantial changes in that direction. So it's obviously the case when you say it out loud, right, that a 35-year-old Army infantryman probably should not have an 18-year-old roommate in a dorm, right?
Yep.
This is not going to go well. But change happens slow at universities, right? And so one of the things that we had to figure out was, well, how can we make this work, not just for that student, but for students that are in any particular combination of age, family status, number of dependents, number of children, living on campus, living off campus. And it's been really useful to be able to work with the students to talk through both what they want and need, to be able to craft policy that allows us to do things that we wouldn't have been able to do before we had a substantial veteran population. So just to give a couple of examples, our students who have dependents or spouses of any kind are now eligible to move into our graduate housing, right? And that allows them to be in a position where they're not quite right up in the middle of campus, right? They're kind of on its periphery, so there's a little bit of space between their private life and their kind of public persona as a student, but it gives them something that is much more apartment style living. They're around a much more age appropriate cohort because they're mostly around other graduate students. Those students are also more likely to also have children, right? So they're around a social group that is a little bit more like them in terms of age and experience. And so that has worked out quite well. We also, with the students helping push this move, we eliminated for them Princeton's residency requirement. So Princeton is a residential college. It's been very important to the school that be the case, that when you are admitted, you're assigned to one of our 7 residential colleges. And last time I checked, the number of students who lived on campus all 4 years was 90+%, right? The overwhelming majority of students stay on campus the whole time, and they're required to for the first 2 years, right? And so that put us in a position where even students who would prefer to even not live in graduate housing, but to actually, maybe they want to buy a condo, buy a house, or live in an apartment, or be outside of Princeton altogether, and maybe not be a commuter in the sense of coming from many, many miles away, but just to have a bit of additional space and to create a household on their own terms, rather than on terms that are imposed upon them. It was very clear from a number of the students that for some of them, this really mattered. And so we wanted to honor that. And so starting this year, the residency requirement has been waived completely for them. But what I think it points to that's really interesting and says something about the diversity within the student body is how among that group, people land in very different spaces on this kind of continuum between, no, actually put me in the dorms. Even give me a roommate, right? I mean, we have students that feel like, no, I got into Princeton. I want to have the traditional Princeton experience, right? Sign me up. I'll do all the things. And then we have this group that's on the other side that tends to be a little bit older, tends to have a family, usually spouse and kids, that feel I'm proud to be a Princetonian, right? I'm really excited about the experience that I'm going to have, but I'm not 18, right? And I don't want to have an experience that treats me like I'm 18. I'm an adult. And this is what a private life would look like that would suit me, that would meet my intellectual and emotional needs, while allowing me to succeed in this curriculum in the same way that other students can succeed in theirs. And so that's been a really interesting learning experience for me. And I think the university, while any bureaucracy, the wheels turn slowly, I've been proud of the way that the university has been able to respond effectively to those needs over time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look at, the numbers of veterans on your campus, right? You implement the policy for the transfer admissions process in 2016, and your numbers on campus have consistently grown, right? You've started this new position, Keith, and put additional support mechanisms in place, and you see that your students are happy and thriving there, right? So I think being adaptable and open to saying, okay, well, let's try it, right? Let's listen to our students. Let's listen to, the population that we're saying that we want to attract and recruit, and truly investing in their success. And which brings me back, one of the applicants I had the opportunity to work with this year, I was talking to him about his options. He had really great options in front of him. And I was like, at the end of the day, which institution made you feel like they were invested in your success? And he said, without a doubt, it's Princeton, right? Alex made me feel comfortable in the admissions process. He was the one that, gave me the confidence to be able to, get over his own imposter syndrome of thinking I don't belong on that campus, or I'm not going to do well there, right? And then he talks to some of your current student veterans on campus, and they tell him all about the incredible opportunities he has, or the community that, you've been able to establish and just kind of let blossom on their own, right? That all didn't happen overnight, but I mean, 2016 wasn't that long ago, right? And in the grand scheme of how slow higher ed typically is to respond to things. So the work that you all are doing, I mean, it's making an impact on the students that are looking for that, right? For their next step. And I think something that you've both kind of, woven through your answers here is instilling confidence in your students, right? Whether or not that starts, in your initial conversation with them, Alex, and helping them understand and giving them the knowledge of what to do next, or this could be a reality for you. And then, you pass them off to Keith, and then having them become a part of that community, and the confidence to be able to say, hey, this is what we want. This is going to, having, off-campus housing, waiver, or even just the graduate housing option, that gives them the confidence to ensure that they're successful on your campus, right? If a student feels like they can't speak up, no one's going to listen, right? That's kind of stifling. So that confidence piece is just, it's so simple, right? Because I think you ask anyone in higher ed, you're like, oh yeah, we want our students to be successful, right? Like, we're here to help them achieve those goals, but being able to see that in practice and see success of those efforts, I think is just, applaud to you all in the work that you're doing and continuing to do. But just, knowing that students are recognizing the work that you all are doing. And, I think a lot of times it's like the thankless job, right? Like, you're here reading all of these files, Alex, that, are ultimately going to end up on your desk, and wondering if you can push through another essay, just knowing that there's students that I interact with every day that are just so appreciative of the work that you both are doing. I'm incredibly appreciative of the work that you all are doing as we start to just spread the awareness and best practices of how to better support this student population. I think is just really, really important as more veterans are pursuing in-person higher education opportunities. One thing, Alex, I know that we get a lot of feedback from students interacting with you on the admissions side, comes in the form of financial aid, So just the financial investment there. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you work closely with the financial aid office and those conversations that you have with student veterans as far as the financial investment that Princeton has, shown to your prospective applicants?
Sure. Based on the way our process works, and I think the privileged position that Princeton is able to be in terms of the amount of resources we have per student, is there's sort of this a unique relationship we have with the financial aid office, and that we work very closely with them in the process so they can provide financial aid. But at the same time, we kind of have a wall set up, and being need blind and knowing that, being in the fortunate position that we don't have to consider a student's need in deciding whether to admit them, because we know that we can meet 100% of the cost of attendance, which at Princeton includes obviously not just tuition, which is the bulk of it, but also their living expenses, their housing expenses that Keith spoke about a lot, as well as just other expenses that might be incidental as well. So for our applicants out there, I mean, one of the most important first things I say and all our colleagues say is, if you are applying for admission, apply for financial aid at the same time. Because too many times we see students who apply and they don't think they're going to get in, whether it's a confidence issue or whatever else, and they do get in, but they haven't applied for financial aid, and obviously they need to start putting that application in at the, at that point, which is not at all the ideal time to do it, but our financial aid office is able to put together their awards before we actually make them respond to the offer of admission. Obviously, before we never ask them to do that before they know what it's going to cost for them to attend. But another thing I would say to students is that financial aid is, not just at Princeton, but a lot of great Vetling schools, is much stronger there than you would might think, based on what's available, and particularly what the VA will tell you based on benefits. And I'm not knocking the VA, but I think the information they have is very limited, and also doesn't take into account those financial aid processes. They basically kind of work what your cost, or what your GI Bill or benefits would cover, and then what the remainder being out of pocket, which for the average student at Princeton shows up as like 40,000 or something like that. Not to say, not pointing out the incredibly important difference that that pocket is not your own pocket, but Princeton would cover the remainder of that. And then not only that, but schools like Princeton will provide, if you are qualifying for full aid, as most of our veteran students do by virtue of being independent and not dependent on parent income, as is the average high school student. If they're qualifying for full need, then the grant can actually replace those any benefits. So I usually say the only students that I know of on campus who are using military benefits are really mostly military dependents who are using yellow ribbon rather than post 9/11 or veterans themselves, because if they're given the option of using the GI Bill and having the grant cover the rest, or just have the grant cover everything, it's kind of a no-brainer. They would save it, especially if they want to go to graduate school or whatever. So, and again, the fact that this takes into account housing in several ways is also huge. And I think, just to clarify the point, because I think it sometimes gets lost in terms of this pretty momentous removal of the housing requirement, puts the veteran and transfer students in the unique position of not only being the only population for whom housing is not required, but also being afforded the opportunity of guaranteed housing if they want it for all 4 years or all 3 years or however many years it take to graduate if they come in as transfers. So that, and again, Keith will tell you it's a mixed bag, but a good number of students want to live on campus or at least try it, and then they can leave campus and live off campus if they want, or vice versa. But the cost is still covered. Effectively, if they're living in on-campus housing, it's basically a part of their bill, which is deducted by whatever their need-based aid is, or if they're living off campus and paying rent to a third party, that cost of attendance is translated into something like a stipend. Our financial aid colleagues who know much more about money than I ever will tell me stipend isn't technically the correct term, but I think for all intents and purposes, it's basically the same idea. So applying for financial aid at these great institutions, and for any student, military or otherwise, who sees that $75,000, $80,000 per student per year price tag and thinks, I can't afford that. The reality is most of our students can't and aren't expected to. And the aid we provide for our veterans, or really any independent student, is as strong as any institution, and stronger than any, just pretty much any student that we have on campus, because what we can provide for them. So our students tend to say, they're not paying anything to go to Princeton. In some cases, they say they're even getting paid to go to Princeton if they're not using their entire stipend and getting a net gain. I don't think that's especially typical, but one of our students likes to say that, because I guess it's a fun thing to say, but it's true. I think with all the advising and resources that we provide on our side, it really wouldn't make any kind of impact if Princeton wasn't literally, so to speak, putting its money where its mouth is and supporting these populations with these initiatives, but also directing the financial aid to support them as well.
Yeah. And I tell applicants all the time, look for an institution that invested in your academic success, your social success, and also your financial success, right? And if an applicant can save their GI Bill for graduate work, law school, med school, whatever it is, that is your long-term financial success, right? Because that just allows you to go through your studies and enter the workforce without a giant student loan debt bill that, everyone's looking back and wishing they didn't have student loans to pay off. So just invested in long-term success, right? And I think that when I talk to applicants, encouraging them, like you said, apply for financial aid early. Apply for financial aid too, because so many of them are like, oh, well, I have benefits, so I don't need to apply for financial aid. And it's like, wrong, do it. It's free. What's the worst that could happen? They give you nothing. But like you said, Alex, a majority of them are going to get, really strong financial aid packages. So um, as we wrap up here, I want to give you both an opportunity to just share one lasting piece of advice, either for our listeners who are potential prospective applicants, current students who are studying in higher education and potentially looking to, transfer, or for our higher ed colleagues as they look to either strengthen their recruitment practices or some of their support on campus. Keith, we'll go ahead and start with you.
Sure, and I'll aim this one at prospective students. And I think the advice would be raise your aspirations and keep your options open. And what I mean by that, for raise your aspirations, I would say, I think many student veterans are too ready to sell themselves short with respect to what is realistically possible for the next step on their education journey. And in particular, I think a lot of the very good work that Alex has done over the last couple of years has been making the case that whether it's Princeton or another elite or highly selective college, that is a realistic option for a lot of students who just don't at first believe that. And I think students are a little bit too ready to commit to an institution that might be a little bit more limited in the way it can support them, either intellectually or financially in the way that you had so usefully described, Sydney, then is really the case. And so I think part of doing your research and working with institutions like Service School, Warrior Scholar, and so forth is getting a sense of what the range is. And my advice is to always err in the direction of shooting a little high, because again, the worst thing that happens is you're not going to get in. Right. And we really don't want to see students settle or have lower ambitions than they're actually capable of. For the keep the options open piece, and this might be the sort of traditional commitment to the liberal arts that I'm still stuck with, is the idea that I also think, in addition to sometimes not setting their sights sufficiently high, sometimes student veterans commit too early to a path and don't let the opportunities that are placed in front of them allow them to rethink what they might do with their next step. So very often, many of our student veterans who are coming in, they want to be an engineer or a lawyer or a doctor. And that makes all kinds of sense. And there's nothing wrong with being an engineer or a lawyer or a doctor. But often what they're saying is, I want a career that I'm going to make a good living. And of course, we want you to do that. But I think one of the things that our students have experienced, especially in their first year when they're enrolled, is this kind of epiphany that, oh, there are all of these other things, right? I didn't know that this is a career. I didn't know that I could do archaeology or anthropology or sociology or any number of other things. And some of our students have gone on to what to them would seem like really unlikely careers to the version of themselves prior to their admission that they're much happier with, because they gave themselves the permission to imagine doing something else, right? And if you're going into an institution of higher education, yes, of course, it's about the credential. Of course, it's about the leverage to a career that's going to allow you to support yourself and your family. And I'm certainly not saying that you should minimize that as a priority, but I am saying that when you find yourself in that position, do take a deep breath and take seriously what you're interested in and what you love, and use the opportunity of the flexibility you have to take the class that just sounds cool, even if it doesn't necessarily lead somewhere, because some of those classes might lead somewhere. And you'd be doing yourself a disservice if you shut down what might be a really exciting life path because it didn't sound like the thing that would lead to the job.
Absolutely. That's great advice. Alex, what would you say is your lasting advice?
Keith has a reputation for winning them over to politics as well. So it's a running joke that he's a feather in his cap for everyone he converts to politics major.
Yeah, by taking classes that sound interesting, I mean political science classes.
Interesting to Keith, right? So before I give my piece, I do want to say again, as we're wrapping up, thank you again for having us, and I appreciate your comments and your recognition of the work that we do, but really really want to stress that none of that would be possible or really even as effective as it is without the great partnerships we have across our offices at the university, across universities, and importantly with our colleagues on the other side of the desk, particularly with great partners like Services School and Warrior Scholar. And like I said, these conversations I set up, these Zoom links I'm sending out, every now and then a student will just randomly find me on our website or whatever, or just email me or call me out of the blue, and that will start the connection that way. But a lot of the times it's an introduction that's made through a student who finds one of our partners before and refers them to us. So really want to thank you for being great partners in this process and allowing us to maximize our impact and connection with these students, whether they end up at Princeton or elsewhere. I think the last thing I would leave would be to reiterate what I said, but really target it at kind of both sides. I guess you kind of say all three sides of this process, whether it's the prospective student, whether it's the higher education institution talking to those students or trying to recruit those students, or a partner or liaison in the middle like Services School or an ambassador who's helping to connect, and it's again really stressing the importance of meeting students where they're at and how unique that may be to that student and how individualized this process needs to be between the approach that one particular student took with their success transitioning from the military to whichever branch that may be, to whichever college it may have worked for them and it may work for other students, but the circumstances, the background, the needs, and the goals and the fit are unique to every single student. So there are certainly great valuable insights that they can provide, but no crux of that, whether it's the student, the partner, or the individual institution, can fulfill that by themselves, which is why I can't speak to what it's like to applying as a veteran, but that's the great value that Services School can provide. But whether it's the policy of how to apply, what academic support is available, or financial aid, that's where my expertise is, especially because these are questions absolutely addressed to the individual institution, because they vary not only by institution, but also policies change all the time. There are a lot of steps to this process, whether it's the timing of the application, between timing that with your separation and what academic preparation you need, and how your academic preparation or what things you need to do to be prepared are impacted by that timing. What process do you choose? First year versus transfer versus maybe a third option? Are they binding? Are they non-binding? Financial aid, is it need-based, merit-based? And if as a prospective applicant you understand all of those concepts, I applaud you for sure, because it's taken me 18 years to get my head around it. But chances are there's a lot of nuances there that may be clearer or less clear. And the important thing is just ask us. We're here to be open. Higher institutions understand that there are a lot of layers here, and really meeting these students where they are, which can be very different across diverse populations within and outside the military. That's how I find these conversations to be most helpful. And whether that ends up with them applying to Princeton, coming to Princeton, or having a different option, or maybe even being open to applying in a future year, that's I think the most important thing to keep in mind, just how individualized this should be to each applicant, and how we can all mutually support each other in this process. And a lot of that comes with, again, supplying that confidence. I think that Keith said, I would absolutely echo that in terms of however meandering a trajectory has been. I remind students, prospective students, I don't care what your past GPA was. There are absolutely successful honor students at Princeton, at Harvard, who failed out of high school, maybe failed out of college more than once, and are doing outstanding work now because they found their stride a little bit later. I've never seen a student who, if they were willing to put in the work to transition, could absolutely be, could not be a competitive candidate based on their background. It's just a question of whether they have the time and ability to put in the work and are really, and how important that target, that goal of Princeton or whatever college is the right fit for them might be. So really want to encourage everyone to invest that time, whether it's yourself as an applicant, whether it's as an institution of higher education and you want to work with these students, whether it's for your institution or otherwise. And obviously the major crux of that relationship being our partners like you all at Service to School, team effort, and without the strengths that we each individually bring, I think it'd be very difficult to do our work nearly as effectively.
Absolutely. It totally is a team effort. And with that, thank you both for taking some time out of your busy calendars and for letting me pick your brain a little bit about how you best support student veterans on your campus at Princeton. Thank you so much for continuing to partner with Service to School. I always know I'm sending students off to someone who will take care of them when I'm sending those introduction emails. So you both, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week. I hope our listeners were able to, glean some good pieces of information, either about their application or what being a student veteran would look like at Princeton. So we'll talk to you both later. Enjoy the rest of your day. And thanks again for your time.
Thank you, Sydney. This was fun.
Great.
Thanks, Sydney. Appreciate the opportunity.
Bye-bye. That's it for this episode. Join us next week, same time, same place, where we share more Service to School stories. Service to School Stories is hosted by Sydney Mathis, the Director of Student Success, and produced by Amanda DeBias, the Director of Communication at Service to School. Service to School is a 501c3 nonprofit providing free college admission support to transitioning service members and veterans. Join us next time and follow us for more on all of your favorite social media platforms.